The central thesis of the documentary film 1946 is that the Revised Standard Version's original rendering of homosexuals for the Greek words malaki and arsenokite in 1 Corinthians 6:9 is a mistranslation, and that thesis is 100% correct. Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion. Now the film goes on to discuss a few different theories about who precisely is in view with these two words. And while we can't really achieve the degree of specificity and granularity that we would like, the best scholarship on this issue is in pretty general agreement that malaki refers to men who take the receptive role in a specific act of male same-sex intercourse, and arsenokite refers to men who take the insertive role in that specific act of male same-sex intercourse. And there's not a ton we can say beyond that, apart from pointing out that these two roles were pretty incommensurate categories. There was no real overlap, there was no versatile role, and that there was a power imbalance between these two, and that overwhelmingly these were seen as exploitative or abusive acts. Now, there are a couple reasons that rendering homosexuals fundamentally distorts what was intended by the author of this text. And the first is the fact that the English word homosexuals refers overwhelmingly to people who identify with a specific sexual orientation. And anciently, they did not have a concept of a sexual orientation that remotely approximates what we understand by that term today, and therefore how we use that term. And so when we say homosexuals, that is a group that is significantly different from whoever was intended by these two terms in 1 Corinthians 6:9. And so that rendering fundamentally distorts what the author intended by significantly expanding the scope of the referent of those two words. But it gets even worse, because those two words, whatever they mean precisely, very clearly refer only to men and not to women. And when we use the English word homosexuals today, we're grouping in men and women. And so we have even further expanded the scope of the referent beyond what was clearly intended by the authors. And so rendering homosexuals ropes in a far larger group of people than could have been intended by the author of 1 Corinthians 6:9, and therefore fundamentally distorts what was intended, and therefore is a mistranslation. And I would add a third, slightly less clear reason this is a mistranslation, which has to do with the perception that these categories were incommensurate, that there was no transfer between the categories, that there was a power imbalance between them, and that these kinds of relationships were understood to be exploitative, abusive, and unequal, which means this is not a reference to contemporary same-sex relationships that are overwhelmingly equal, loving, monogamous, long-term family relationships. So they had no concept of that kind of same-sex relationship in the ancient world. And so to refer to those types of relationships in translating malaki and arsenokite, again, fundamentally distorts what was being communicated by the author. And the reason that people will object to the fact that this is a mistranslation is because an awful lot of people really want to use this passage as a proof text to authorize, to validate their homophobia and their desire to structure power and values and boundaries over and against people who identify as homosexuals. And those people just need to grow up and get over their bigotry. And the fit for this video has been a Marvel ensemble.